Okay, welcome everyone. I'm here with Neil Godbole, owner and lead engineer at Airship Labs, and he was such a huge part of making this album, Epiphanies, and bringing this kind of new sound for the sitar. And I wanted to spend some time just kind of talking about the rabbit holes we went into and the ideas that we applied to make this album sound like what it does. So welcome and thanks for taking the time, Neil.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
So to start with, you've recorded, all kinds of top artists in Indian classical as well as outside, and you've of course worked with sitar as well. Um, what was different for you going into this compared to past projects in terms of how you approach working with the sitar?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, especially from the perspective of having recorded a lot of these instruments before, but always trying to push the envelope, trying to do something different. I saw that there was an opportunity, especially with working with you, in the sense that you'd voiced to me before that there was always something missing in what was the total possible sound that the sitar could have, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of its
Yeah.
full range, in terms of the way that it was sort of captured. And, a lot of times when I'm working with a particular artist, the focus is not always on the capturing of the instrument, right? I mean, the first and foremost focus should always be the performance, the mood, the vibe, and those kind of things. But to really experiment and try to get something different and unique, you got to kind of have an artist who wants to also take that deep dive with you and say, let's see what's possible. And me and you, we've cultivated this relationship of experimentation
Mm-hmm.
at the Airship, trying to see if we can't push the envelope together. And you've got an engineer's mind, and so it was the perfect opportunity for me, for us to basically say, hey, let's try to do something different here, and take that time and try a few different things.
Yeah. And from my side, like you're saying, we've been working on projects over the years, and I feel like each one has kind of pushed the envelope in terms of the sound of the sitar, and we keep sort of experimenting and working on different things. So for me, this project was the opportunity to really kind of bring together those things we've learned and figured out over the years, and really almost set up like a new protocol for recording the sitar and crafting a sound. Um, I mean, some of it is based on things that have been done for decades, in terms of where you put the mics, but some of the, newer mics we used and putting some of them in weird locations, I think really added something unusual. So I was really excited to kind of, uh, step into a big project and do that really nicely. And I think we did achieve something that sounds different. It doesn't sound like your typical sitar sound.
Yeah, I think it was important, I think, to sort of honor the past tradition of how the sitar was coming across, but then add to that, right? And then expand that a little bit, both in terms of the capturing of its range, but also the way the perspective of the sitar was produced. I think one of the things you mentioned to me was, so oftentimes it's it comes across in a way that's different than the way you feel and hear the instrument being, playing it and being behind it. And so
Mm-hmm.
can we bring that sense of intimacy from the performer's perspective, but also uh, make it something that is relatable to the listener as well?
Right. Yeah, so that's a good segue to just kind of jump into talking about how we tracked it, in terms of,
Yeah.
getting the sound, among other things, like I was saying, that getting the sound profile that I hear behind the instrument. So that's absolutely one of the things that, I was trying to achieve here. On this particular instrument we use, the Huron Roy, all sitars have this quality, but I've been noticing, especially in recent years, doing more recordings and even in live shows, that the sound of the front of the sitar and even the sound, the bridge, and the sound holes of the sitar, it's really quite different from the neck of the sitar, and especially from the backside, the rear of the sitar. The front is sort of boxy and really focused, and it's got all the detail of the strings, but the back of the sitar has this sort of general sort of warm resonance of the neck of the sitar and the back of the gourd resonating, that to me is such a different character. And we actually ended up using a third mic basically next to my ear to capture that.
Yeah.
Which I think really added something a lot. But give me your, what were you thinking as we went into kind of setting this up, not just the mics, but other gear you used, and what was your approach to achieving what we were trying to do?
Yeah, yeah. We talked a little bit beforehand in the pre-production phase about, this concept of different sound templates. And, what I really wanted to do was be able to work with that concept of creating some different sound profiles that might make sense depending on the movement of the piece, but also to try to create something that would be very synergistic, like the most kind of a combination of two things, right? Create the best general overall sound that had maybe the most flexibility just inherently within the sound of the three microphones blended together, but then also have the ability to maybe move some of those mic positions around a little bit in terms of just their respective volumes, and then get maybe an emphasis on a particular aspect. Like, for example, when you're playing some of the low, more resonant strings, can we emphasize that just very naturally by raising up some of the volumes and creating a template there? Or if we wanted that big, wide open sound, or when you're going into a faster, heavier section where the Chikari strings are kind of resonating a lot, can we tame those while still remaining true to the power and intensity of the instrument, right? And
Actually, let's that
yeah,
reminds me, take a step back here and let's describe like the whole
yeah,
situation and kind of go in here, because it was definitely not a typical studio session, right?
not at all. And we had to do a lot of planning because you really manned the tracking session once we got everything set up, and I had to be really cognizant of that, saying, okay, let's get every possible thing set up that you would need so you could take control and we could step back from the sound aspect of it and you could just get into the performance, right? Because
Right.
there wasn't going to be anybody else there. I mean, you came into the studio on your own, sat down behind the gear and the sitar and just played, and I think it worked out really well.
Yeah, I mean, what was cool about that, I mean, of course, the original reason I did that was just because it was, the middle of COVID and we were all trying to be super conscious
Yep.
and that sort of thing. But I think the benefit of it was like not having that pressure of, okay, there's my engineer sitting there in the booth, like waiting for me to do a good take. And
Peering over you, looking at you like, come
and
on.
it's right. And it's not like, I was coming in here with a whole set of, fixed songs to play. I mean, I was doing this very organically Indian classical style. Like, I didn't even know which rags I was going to play some days. I was just like, I think this feels like a Laskani Todi day. And I would just come in and, of course, I've trained enough that I can pull a rag out after, not having played it for months, but sometimes it was just very spontaneous. So I think that gave me that freedom to be like, I think I'm going to lie on the floor for half an hour and just imagine this thing I'm about to play and not worry that my engineer is waiting to take his lunch. you know, so that was very cool. And I appreciated you giving me that kind of freedom to just, okay, I'm going to flip on the gear here and just record it at my own schedule.
I mean, there's so many aspects of the project from my perspective that were interesting and exciting for that reason. I mean, one of the things that traditionally that we would have at recording studios when there were, it was a different time period, was that, it was expected that recordings would take a long time. And, with the gear, the technology, and we're talking about in the 70s and the 80s. And then now things have become quite a bit different, especially with our ability to edit later. And one thing that can oftentimes, I feel like, get lost in the shuffle is just the energy and vibe that is put into a piece when, through just the time, relaxation, and no sense of pressure at all, but the sense that it's going to come of its own, that the piece kind of unfolds. And I really wanted that for the solo record because, after all, like, I think that the mood, the energy, the time of day, all these things ideally make a big difference to specifically this record. And practically, if we were doing this, and I mean, it's almost ironic, but in a non-COVID time period, maybe there wouldn't have been.
Right. Yeah. Right. Maybe you would have been sitting in the booth and I would have been like, all
Yeah.
right, I got 20 minutes to knock out this take. Like,
Like, okay, I know it's a 20-minute song, dude, but we got 25 minutes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of like silver lining of the whole situation. It really worked out. I wanted to show some pictures just of the space for people who haven't seen. I mean, Airship is just such a beautiful studio, and it's got that nice mix of being sort of intimate and not huge and sort of intimidating in that way, but also just also being sort of elegant and not just feeling like a box with equipment in it at all. Let's see. So this is kind of what I was looking at as I was tracking the Sitar. So we kind of set up 2 stations here, which was smart. That was a good idea on your part. So we had 7 mics set up at all times.
Yeah.
But the 2 you see over here were actually for Tanpura recording. And that was something, well, I'll talk about that in a minute, but we built that whole thing from scratch. So I needed to be able to, depending on the piece I was doing, I might have to record different Tanpuras. So I had to be able to, on my own time, go to mic station 1 or 2 or 3 and have the freedom to do that. And this was the Sitar tracking station with those beautiful unfolding panels. You can't quite see it here, but to the right and left, there are these beautiful curved panels that just reflect the sound in this really beautiful way. I've always enjoyed sitting there and recording. Okay, so here we go. So let's talk about this third mic. So this is the Royer, right?
Yeah, that's the 121, and a very cool mic. And also that mic is both. It's interesting to note that both those ribbons there, that they're kind of opposite each other. They're both in figure 8. So that means that the front and the back are both sensitive to sound, which is cool because it's producing this huge field right there. Right, remember we're getting our main tone from the bridge, and then these 2 microphones are kind of, imagine a big little cloud here surrounding these mics, right? And they're producing this sense of depth and space that is coming off the instrument, but still in relatively close proximity. And one thing that you really mentioned to me, and it's hard for an engineer sometimes to get that perspective or think from that perspective because we're not sitting behind the instrument or we're not intimate with that sound. But we wanted to get that feeling of being right next to you and having a usable sound. And after some experimentation, and fortunately you were still able to play comfortably, we found that this position really kind of gave you that perspective, and was something that blended really well as well with the nature of the other sounds.
Right.